This is a Tyco Clementine, and it needs some work. First up, I'll give it some power. And I can see a headlight. It is incredibly dim. I don't know why that would be. I don't know if it'll show up on camera, but there's certainly a headlight there. You might be able to see it flicker. But I don't hear anything out of the motor, so it looks like we have some sort of electrical problem either in the tender, or we've got some problem with the commutator, motor, something like that. Before we start, a little bit of background on this engine. I recently bought it in a really big lot of locomotives for $100 total, which is great. It came with 18 engines and all that. Nothing else crazy about it. That was all unboxed in a recent video. But this particular engine is not in the best cosmetic shape either. I don't know how well it will come across on camera, but there's quite a bit of beating and damage that this locomotive has taken. First off, the top of the funnel, smokestack, whatever you want to call it, is completely black. It was silver, but all that paint has worn off. There's just random paint chips and whatnot around the boiler of the locomotive and on the cab, as was the case with my old Chattanooga, although it does look like it's got all its front steps and whatnot, which is good. However, the front coupler is broken, which isn't something I care that much about. I might replace it in the future if I really want to. And moving on back to the tender, as you can see as it shines in the light just a little bit, it's got this weird pitting and whatnot going on, even though it's plastic. So I have no clue what happened, but this engine is not in perfect cosmetic shape. While the cosmetics of this unit are imperfect, that does not mean this engine itself has to run imperfect, so it's time to get to work. First of all, I want to attack the locomotive side of this. It's not that crazy. I just want to remove this plate, clean out whatever dirt might be in here, and oil these side rods and bearings and everything related to this dummy front truck. Perfect, that feels pretty free-rolling. It's not perfect. It also was not that filthy in there. I didn't really need to clean out those axles or anything like that. So that was a little bit of a waste of time, but it's not that big of a deal. Next comes the annoying part of working on these things, the tender. I'm going to, at the very least, disconnect the drawbar of the tender from the locomotive first to give myself a little bit more room to work with. In my experience, these drawbars are almost always missing, so it's kind of nice that this one actually has it. So now I think for the rest of this, I can get that engine cradle out of the way, and I can just pop the shell off the tender. Like so. And now we have access to everything I need to get to. The first thing I need to do is one of the most annoying steps, to me at least, about working on these things. To hold these little trucks in that make the tender trucks actually look like trucks, they have these little pins in there. I don't know what the exact right word is to call them, but they're sort of a washer, and they hold these on. They're really annoying to get off, so I've just got this pair of, a pair of tweezers right here that does not have any very sharp tip, so it should be perfect for pushing these off. But first, I'm just going to detach these contacts. So, those are now removed. I think I'm going to live without them on the engine because even though they're there in the first place, they're really annoying, and with this whole thing screwed in place, there's really no chance that these will come off. They might get to exactly this point, but the metal here is so thick that it won't really fall off, so I don't really have any concerns with it being this way. I would, in the future, like to find a good way to replace those washers with something easier to remove to make these easier to work on. If anyone has any suggestions, please let me know because I'd love to hear them. But for now, these Clementines, Chattanoogas, all these tender drive Tycos that I have, I kind of want to just keep without those washers on them. Now that I'm done dealing with that pain, I'm just going to unscrew the motor from the bottom of the tender shell. And by shell, I mean chassis. And there we go, the drive truck is now free from the shell of the tender. Shell, chassis, whatever you want to call this piece. It's plastic, it holds this in, connects to this. And getting these trucks out further proved why I want to run this thing without washers, because without removing the covers of these trucks, even when the motor was unscrewed from the base of the chassis, you still couldn't get them out. It's really difficult to remove them. I don't know why Tyco put washers in there in the first place, maybe for added security or something. I don't know. I just don't like them and don't think they're necessary. And just because I know I'll get it wrong eventually and forget, the pickups should go like this. The non-pickup wheel should go on the side of the motor cover, and the pickup wheel should go on the side with all the gearing. So if I get that wrong, or if I said that wrong now, someone will probably yell at me for it. While I've got these pieces apart already, I feel like it might be a good idea just to clean them out. It's not going to be anything crazy in here because there usually isn't, but it's just a good idea, especially since they pick up power. I know I'll have to probably remove this cover later, but just so I don't forget which way they go, and so the pieces stay together. Perfect. Now I don't have to worry about these until we're putting the unit back together. Next, before we move on to cleaning out the actual motor truck itself, I'm just going to clean out the chassis. Now, it's on to what's similar for every single Tyco, the motor truck. I do want to check these axles because I know sometimes they can crack, which is a problem. And it sort of does look like this outer wheel has cracked. I'm not going to call this a huge issue because even though it does kind of move around on the axle a little bit, I think A, when I put some new traction tires on this thing, it should help contain the movement or something like that. Because the traction tires, they're elastic, they provide some friction, so it might help hold it together a little bit. And B, it's also not on the it's not cracked on the gear itself, it's only cracked on the other axle, so it's not going to make any annoying noise. It looks like this one here is fine. There's a little crack on this gear, but it's nothing major. And it looks like here, it's the exact same problem as the other axle. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. I can live with that. Before we go taking all the springs and brushes and everything out, I'm going to get the gears off this side. That looks pretty bad. Good, all those came out without pivots breaking, which is the issue I had last time I worked on one of these things, so we're off to a better start than last time. Alright, perfect. All that stuff is out of there. I've just removed the plates off of the commutator itself so I can put this back together easier, because it's usually easier to put the springs and brushes in when those plates aren't there. So I'm going to try that. I don't know how well it'll work out, because sometimes those plates don't like going back in place, but we'll see. Now that we've got all this apart, I do see a concerning sign. These brushes here, I don't know how well my camera will try and focus on them, but they are really compressed. They should not look like this, but luckily, I do think I have some spares. So I'm gonna set these and the brushes in my little parts tray, and for now, I just simply want to start by cleaning off this whole motor block, because let's face it, it looks bad. Before I go hunting for springs, I'm also just going to clean out the cover plate, because I feel like that's something I should do while I'm not focused on putting the thing back together. I'm now back, and I have found some springs that should work for this unit. I also cleaned the brushes off camera. So now all I've really got left to do with this motor is to insert the brushes and the new springs, and then try and install these plates that I removed earlier. That looks like one. Now I'm going to take a brief pause and just see if that work paid off and if I need to make any adjustments or anything. That test has been completed and the motor now runs. So now I get to focus on cleaning up these gears as well as the wheels. I'm gonna call that good enough. This one gear here, in particular, as you saw, was pretty difficult. There's still a little bit of dirt and grime and stuff on there, but it does not seem too bad, so I'm gonna leave it alone. Now that all those parts are cleaned off, all I really have left to do is to throw some traction tires on those wheels and then put the whole thing back together. I'm gonna throw on the traction tires off camera, so I'll come back and we can start putting this engine back together. Traction tires have now been installed. They're not perfect, but they should do the job pretty well. As in, they're not the most even, they should still provide extra traction. It might add a little bit of extra noise, but I don't care that much because it's an old Tyco, and any reduction in noise from original is pretty good, and I'm fine with some tire noise. So first of all, I want to give the bearings for the motor some oil, since I forgot to do that earlier. I'll give this little gear a bit of oil, and I'll throw in some oil on all the pivots. Next I'll throw oil on all the gears, and then I think we can put some oil on these and throw them into the shell, or frame, whatever I want to call it. Alright, now that that's all back together, before I put the shell on, I'm going to do one small modification to this. I'm going to throw on some neodymium magnets on each end of the block here. I've just found that in the past, this usually helps these things run a little bit better, so I'm going to try it out, see if it helps anything. It looks like last step I have to do before I run this thing is attach this drawbar and install a new coupler, which I'm going to do really quickly off camera. It's now time for the moment of truth. Let's see if this thing will run. And indeed it does. I don't really want to run it in reverse because these horn hook couplers on these things run a little bit low, and I don't want to break it, derail it, anything like that, so I'm just going to run it forwards a few laps. It seems a little bit sluggish for full power, but this engine might just need to work in because, again, we've just worked on it. So I think I'm going to call that a success. We took this engine that was originally not running and made it run pretty well. I think that's good, and with the magnets I've installed, I might be able to put a decoder in this thing at some point. So we'll have to see.